Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia. And with me on the other line, ba-da-bum-bum, it is the Brutal Boyz themselves, Jason Evans and Josh Sewell. Welcome, guys. We are finally here to talk about one of the great movies of 2024, The Brutalist. This is going to be, I will first preface this by saying we are going to do a full spoiler discussion of this movie. If you have not seen The Brutalist, but you want kind of a little tease, I would encourage you to go listen to our best movies of 2024 episode where Josh and I believe, talked about it. Jason, I don't think you had seen it yet, so you're probably the person to start with when we actually talk about the movie. But if you haven't seen The Brutalist and you don't want any spoilers, just listen to that episode. It'll give you like a little tease, and then come back and listen to this one where we'll sort of get into all the nitty gritty of Brady Corbet's 3.5 hour opus about art and immigration and trauma. But first, Jason, you wanted to discuss a very important piece of movie news for us that kind of is somewhat related. Another big filmmaker directing a massive sweeping epic. You wanted to discuss the casting of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey?
Yeah, exactly. We just got word this week. They've sort of rounded out the cast. Can I just read it to you first? For you to be
please
like,
do.
Holy, yeah, it's unbelievable. So it is Christopher Nolan taking on the great poem by the great, story by Homer of The Odyssey, which is one of the, classic stories in the history of storytelling. And a story that is very sweeping, covers a number of, the Homeric tale takes you to a number of different locations, and in each location, the main character encounters, other folks who become big characters for a moment in the story. So you can see how there would be a lot of characters in this tale. In any event, the cast is Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, Anne Hathaway, Charlize Theron, John Barenthal, Elliot Page, Himesh Patel. Come on. Samantha Morton's in this. Bill Irwin, who is this like amazing physical clown. If you saw him, you would instantly go, "Oh yeah, I know who Bill Irwin is."
Great character actor.
Yeah, Bill Irwin also did the voice of Tars, the robot in Interstellar.
That's right.
Yes, he did. And there are a lot of folks who've worked with Christopher Nolan in the past in this group. Like Matt Damon, of course, was in Interstellar and Oppenheimer. Robert Pattinson was I guess the number 2 star in Tenet. Anne Hathaway was in Interstellar. Benny Safdie was in Oppenheimer. Himesh Patel was in Tenet. Ellen Page was like the number 2 star in Inception. It's a bunch of folks who've worked with Christopher Nolan before. I'm fascinated in this film, because Christopher Nolan, I don't think there's even when he's making something that doesn't really work like Tenet, he's making really interesting films and gets really interesting performances. But this feels a little bit like Oppenheimer, like he's just gathering all the stars.
He's now on sort of like the Wes Anderson level of just sort of like, even the person that's just sort of like picking up the phone in the background is like a pretty big name celebrity. If that makes
exactly.
sense.
We're gonna have a best casting Oscar, as we discussed on the last episode. Whoever's casting this movie has a big leg up because everyone wants to appear with Christopher Nolan.
Josh, you're not going to drop any hot takes. Not going to be like Benny Safdie sucks.
Josh just nods. He's just like,
I'm just listening.
Yes, Zendaya overrated.
No, I was just thinking, like, I was already in my head doing the politicking for the cast Oscar next year of people going like, well, how much does the casting director really do when Nolan just has to call them and be like, you want to be in my movie? They'll be like, yeah.
So have they announced like who? I say this because like I do not remember like any of the characters in the Odyssey other than Odysseus and Odysseus's wife. But like, have they announced like who is playing who? Like, I assume Damon is going to be Odysseus. I saw some rumor Tom Holland was going to be him, but like that seems way too young to be.
Yeah, no. My bet is that Matt Damon's playing Odysseus. If you really remember, and I read it years and years ago. If you remember the Odyssey, There's a lot of it that takes place back in Odysseus's kingdom that he's trying to get back to, involving his wife and his son trying to fend off, like, everyone just assumes Odysseus is dead, and they're trying to fend off because they don't have cell phones and things like that. So my bet is that Tom Holland is going to play his son.
Okay, that makes more sense.
There you go.
Has there been a movie adaptation of the Odyssey? I guess I didn't see it, but there's that one that I think just came out where Ray Fiennes playing Odysseus and Juliette Binoche playing his wife, but it's only like that ending section of the poem where like he returns home and like no one recognizes him because he's like an old man. And then I guess there was a TV movie version in the 90s that I remember seeing as a kid, just when there would be the like, here's ABC's Saturday movie of the week or something like that. But like, am I wrong? This has never been like brought to the big screen before.
I think you're forgetting about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh, that's true. Of course.
No, if you really, and I my bet is that Christopher Nolan is someone who has the cachet, I should say, to be able to do it. If you really did the whole story, I don't know how it's less than 4 hours.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
Do we think there'll be like time jumps, and Nolan's going to do some weird Nolan-y things? All of a sudden, like the Cyclops is moving backwards, like in Tenet.
There's so many different ways you could choose to tackle it. I'm still not sure that he's necessarily doing it back in Greek time, so to speak. I don't know. That hasn't been revealed yet. We just know
it definitely, I think, has been announced that he's like going to shoot it in the Greek islands, but that doesn't mean period piece.
Does this also mean that Kenneth Branagh is playing the Cyclops?
See, I want John Bernthal to play the Cyclops.
I think Charlize Theron is definitely playing one of the sirens. Although there are other female characters who tempt Odysseus. But look, this is... When does this movie come out? It's a 26 release, I'm sure, yeah?
Probably. I don't think they've started doing any shooting or anything. So yeah, I would guess casting, like 26, 27.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just super excited for it. Anything Christopher Nolan does. And by the way, speaking of Christopher Nolan, we're going to be talking about Guy Pearce, who has one of the... I still, if we ever rank, in 18 months or so when this comes out, we'll probably do like a, ranking of your favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I still think Memento is like one of the great films ever.
Would still be up there for me. Yeah.
And Guy Pearce was the star of that, and he's fabulous in it.
I mean, it's funny you bringing up to kind of like transition us into The Brutalist of like, I went and saw it a second time last weekend with my girlfriend, and we walked out and she was like, who is that played, Van Buren played the like big industrialist guy. And I was like, oh, that's Guy Pearce. And she was like, what else has he been in? Like, I recognize him. And then that got us on this whole long conversation of like, his career is so interesting, of like a guy who, I mean, you guys can probably speak to this better than I can, but the sense that I get is like late 90s, early 2000s, people were like, this is Hollywood's next like great leading man. And then for whatever reason, it just sort of didn't happen that way. And now he's just sort of like a great character actor who's like hugely respected in the industry, and is just one of those people that's like consistently great every single time, even in like the junkiest movies he's in.
I think that Guy Pearce, I have to feel like he chose not to be a superstar. That's just, I can't imagine he wasn't offered superstar kind of roles. And for the most part, he doesn't do the blockbuster kind of stuff, the stuff that makes you a household name. I mean, even when he does it, it's something edgy and interesting, like Prometheus, where he's buried under a mountain of old man. He plays the old
he's
man.
He's an old
Prometheus.
geezer.
Like, he literally plays a character 60 years older than he is. He did the Marvel thing when he was in Iron Man 3 as...
Oh, that's right.
He was the bad guy in Iron Man 3. And it's a really good, like, Aldrich Killian, I think, is it's an interesting kind of bad guy. Marvel usually has bad guy problems, and Aldrich Killian's an interesting sort of bad guy. He's gotten certainly a lot of awards notice over the years, but The Brutalist is his first Academy Award nomination. Oh, and he started out in L.A. Confidential. That's how we all know him.
Right, like that and Memento are the
Yeah.
two that I think of as sort of like his kind of breakthrough stuff, and what I was sort of indicating when I was like, you see those movies and you're like, oh, I mean, like, yeah, of course, this guy was going to be like a superstar, and like heard stories of people, a little bit older than me who saw L.A. Confidential in theaters, and it wasn't Russell. I mean, Russell Crowe, I guess, was kind of a name at that point, but like Guy Pearce was the person that like everyone walked out of that movie thinking like, well, that guy is going to be,
And he was
the next
unknown.
big thing, not Crowe.
He was unknown at the
Yeah, I
time.
think-
Yeah.
If I remember some of the press about that time, it was, Russell Crowe was slightly more famous, but most of the consensus was like, who are these two Australian guys? Like, and from what I've read, recent interviews with Guy Pearce, because they've asked questions like, how come you haven't worked with Nolan anymore when everybody loves to work with Nolan again? And apparently there's a lot of like behind the scenes like politics and stuff that maybe he just wasn't into. Like it feels like he's kind of a no nonsense, doesn't, just wants to work and not really play the game kind of guy, which can hurt you if you don't schmooze with the right people. But which seems like, because he said somebody at Warner Brothers had it out for him, and he's like, I'm going to make sure you never work with Nolan again. But I don't know. It seems like if Nolan wanted to work with him, Nolan has the pull to make that happen. So I don't know.
Nolan's not at Warner Brothers anymore, so
there you go.
That bridge has been burned. Yeah, I mean, and I think in sort of further bringing us into The Brutalist, like thinking about Adrian Brody's career has been really interesting. Of like someone who, I think you guys will even have, being older than me, have a way different context for this. But like when I was a kid, like Adrian Brody was like a pretty big star. I think because he had like won and like still holds the record, unless Chalamet beats him this year, of being like the youngest person to ever win an Oscar for The Pianist. And then, seeing him in stuff like King Kong and the Darjeeling Limited, of just like, he's someone I just remember like being, like 12, 13 was just a leading man in Hollywood. And then it seems like has kind of disappeared, other than like being in the Wes Anderson sort of stock company. And then now that this feels like a huge, like big return to him as like leading man Hollywood status, and like walking out of The Brutalist the first time, Josh, that you and I saw it, of just being like, where's Brody been all of these years? I mean, do you guys have any like further context to this that like maybe I'm missing? Because it to me, it just was like he was big and then he kind of disappeared, and then like now he's back.
The thing that, while you were talking about that, I was like, where is the last time I saw Adrian Brody? And then I remember like he's had a really solid couple of years. Like he played Pat Riley on that HBO Lakers show.
Showtime.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was really,
or Showtime.
he was really good in that. Yeah.
And then
I've not watched that show just because I have like mixed Adam McKay feelings at this point. But wow.
And then it looks like he was one of the only halfway decent things about Blonde with Ana de Armas.
Oh my God, I forgot he's in that. That's right.
He worked with her again in Ghosted, even though I'd blocked that whole movie out.
That movie doesn't
exist. One of the villains.
He's in everything Wes Anderson does. If Wes Anderson,
right? And
and it looks like
he's so funny. Like I rewatched Grand Budapest like a couple months ago, and he's so funny in Grand Budapest as the villain in that movie.
Yeah, he's been doing a bunch of TV. He was in Succession, it looks like.
Oh my God, that's right. He's really funny on Succession in that one episode.
He's been working really steadily. This is the Succession Oscars, guys.
I know.
But yeah, so it looks like he's just been working steadily, just in more, it feels like he's kind of found his niche as a character actor rather than like a big, above the line name.
I mean, I feel like King Kong maybe said to everyone, Adrian Brody can't be your Hollywood heartthrob lead. King Kong, it didn't do. I like that was Peter.
I'm curious to revisit that movie as an adult, because I remember like loving it when it came out, but I was also 10 when it came
Yeah,
out. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, Peter Jackson is almost trying too hard in that movie. You know, he's coming off the Lord of the Rings, and like he can do whatever he wants, and he's like, I'm doing this, and you're like,
I'm gonna do a 3.5 hour King Kong movie.
but Adrian Brody,
Want to revisit?
you know, he's supposed to be the heartthrob lead in that film, and I don't think he works in that kind of a role, and so I think that maybe after that, Hollywood was sort of like, okay, we can't quite figure. You're great, we can't quite figure out what to do with you, and he keeps on. I mean, look, he keeps on getting roles, significant roles, but they're just not, you know, big blockbuster kind of films. Sort of like Guy Pearce.
Well, I think we're
That
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think we're forgetting that, you know, he was in one of Jason's favorite
The
movies of all
Village.
time, The Village.
Oh, that's right.
we talked about him last week. Let's move on.
He'll always have a special place in my heart as a fellow big nose boy, you know.
Yeah.
Fair.
So let's talk about The Brutalist. This has been, you know, maybe it's not what the person who lives down the street from you is talking about. That person's probably just watching traffic cams and freaking out at if someone's going to make a right turn. But you know, amongst our film community, I feel like The Brutalist has kind of been a sensation. And, you know, I've talked with so many people, especially over the holidays, that were sort of like, when is it coming out? Like, I really want to see this. I keep hearing all this hype about this. Now it's all, you know, it's got a full wide release. Jason, as we mentioned, you had not seen it when Josh and I sort of gave our initial thoughts and put it in our top fives. Josh, I would even say it's risen up my top five since we talked about it, and it's just been a movie that has been like, I've loved just like thinking about this movie over the last few months. But Jason, since you haven't gotten your brutal takes in, what were kind of your initial thoughts that you're stewing on at the moment?
I mean, the poster and the trailer and everything associated with this film has the word monumental in big letters. And I feel like
that's actually really funny, that the like one trailer where it's like 12 different like critics quotes to all just say like monumental coming at the screen.
And I feel like it does apply as a monumental film, both because of its length and its quality. I love the first like 2/3 or so of this movie. I think it's a film about obsession, you know, people who are so dedicated to their craft that they're willing to give up anything to have to do it the right way, the way that they think is correct. But then to me, the final third goes a little bit off the rails, and off the rails maybe too strong. I just didn't like the way the story went in the final third. I hoped we would get to a different kind of place than we did. The film didn't make my top five. It's outside of my top five. It's an outstanding, amazing piece of filmmaking. Some really, really great performances. We've talked already about Guy Pearce and Adrian Brody, Adrian Brody I think is going to win Best Actor and deserves it. This is a tough acting assignment that he envelops the role. You feel his humanity, the character's humanity, and you feel his struggle to make it in America as an immigrant who is just persistently, you know, overlooked and underappreciated. It's a film that I think, despite its length, I was never bored. It never feels slow, even though, like, if I was to describe it, you'd be like, and how does that take 3.5 hours? Like, oh yeah,
they're
gonna spend 45 minutes discussing the type of wood and concrete, and you're like, but it's actually really good.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of give, just because like she's not a you know, a movie dork like us. Like when I went and saw it a second time, you know, with the girl I'm dating last weekend, like we got to the intermission and she was like, we're halfway through.
Yeah.
Like this is flying. And another kind of thing of like, as you mentioned, Jason, it is a movie about, you know, there's long sort of montage stretches, you know, there's a whole, I think, beautiful section where they're putting together like a library in Guy Pearce's house.
Stunning.
And it's riveting. And there's the whole section that is my favorite part in the movie where they go to Italy and go to the marble quarry, and afterwards walking out being like, I was talking to another friend who saw it this past week, and me just saying, marble, like a thing, like, in your house where you're just like, oh, this is just like on the counter, but then like in that movie being like, marble, what an incredible thing that just like exists out in the world. It's just like amazing that there's just like mountains of this out somewhere. And I love how the movie can like envelop you, and it is a movie about architecture and is able to sort of, make you see like, wow, the magnificence of like this room or this building or like this material. Josh, what has it kind of been ringing around in your head these last few months?
Yeah, to kind of jump on what you said there, like, I feel like, for better or for worse, us film critics have developed a reputation for like, oh, we like these kind of films, and the other films are for the the masses, and they're not for sophisticated people like us. And anytime I have a conversation with people outside of this, it's almost like I'm preemptively trying to fight that. And so they're like, oh, well, that's that movie that I hear all these critics talking about. And I was like, I know it sounds like homework, and it's like a capital F film. And, part of that is Brady Corbet himself. It's very clear that this is a huge, ambitious project for him. He's wanting to make the next great American epic. And I said, even if you just erase all of that, which is its own really interesting conversation, if you just go into the movie, I think even, is it going to be for everybody? No. But if you just go in looking for an interesting story with interesting characters, I think a lot of people are going to, land kind of where your girlfriend did, where like when you hit that intermission, you're like, oh yeah, we're an hour and 40 minutes in. I've met these characters. I'm invested in them. And, and from what I've heard, just like with you guys, the second half, I don't feel like is quite as successful in the first. That's when it tends to go from traditional kind of epic to really wrestling with the ideas that it, and wrestling with, and not rejecting but complicating the ideas of the American dream that it raises in the first half. And so I can see where that might be where people who are curious but not nerds like us kind of start losing steam a little bit. But that first half really does a lot to get you drawn into this world.
Yeah, I think I mentioned when we talked about it on our year-end episode, Josh, of like that first half is like, it's like a William Wyler movie. Like it is a very like classical epic American story. And obviously the movie is, I've loved just thinking about how, it's about what it means to be an artist and the complications of like having to deal with financiers, as well as like what kind of impact that has on the people around you. And Brady Corbet has obviously been saying like it's this very literal, making a building is like a very clear allegory to making a movie. But like Jason, as you mentioned, it's also an immigrant story and about assimilation, and there's so many aspects of it that are, I think parallels to things that are happening currently in our country and debates that we're having. And yet it is also a movie that is about like the iron grip of capitalism and is about trauma and how people process that trauma in different ways. And as you kind of indicated, Josh, like when it moves to that second half, which maybe a good conversation is to like, let's talk about the first half of the movie and then talk about the second half if you guys want. But that second half becomes a lot more surreal, and I'll agree. I think the people I've talked to who have seen it, I think that second half is a lot more divisive, whereas like pretty much everyone I know that has seen it is like, first half, masterpiece. Second half, you either like really go with all the crazy directions that Brady Corbet is taking it and all the complications, or it sort of like falls in on itself.
Well, I think,
Jason, you wanted to make a point?
I think the reason the second half is a little more divisive is that we are used to the typical pattern of a film like this, where down on his luck immigrant is recognized, fights and fights and fights for what he wants, and then reaches great success. And the second half says, not necessarily. The path there is
Yeah.
not as easy as you may think. It's not all uphill. You're gonna have to battle drug addiction. You're gonna have to battle just persistent, you know, the fact that you're an immigrant is not forgotten by people, and and the prejudices that come with that are going to be there all along. And you are not going to always be able to get past all these kind of things. And so it doesn't have this like uplifting, like, oh, the good guy character, we're going to get to root for him the whole time. He's a complicated character. If we're talking spoilers, he spends much of the movie addicted to heroin and not handling it really well. And there are definitely times in the second half where you're like, why are you throwing your life away? They're trying to give you the American dream. Here it is. Take it. And he's like, nope, I'd rather have a little heroin. And you're just like, and it's driving you crazy as an audience, because we're used to films following a different pattern, and Brady Corbet didn't want to tell that story, and that's wonderful. That's fine. We need to be challenged by films, and this film does that. But from an audience-pleasing standpoint, that's, I think, why the second half is a little more divisive.
And I think it takes some of the characters and complicates them for, like, the Van Buren character that Guy Pearce plays, this sort of wealthy industrialist that at, the first half of the movie, you're thinking, like, unless you're already predisposed to, like, being skeptical of this kind of person, you're sort of like, oh wow, like what a spark of hope, or a great kind of like the
look how
the
he's lifting this guy up. He's lifting him up. It's so wonderful. Yay.
Right. Yeah. And then in the second half, like, I think it's notable when I saw it a second time, like, it occurred to me the very first conversation or like long dialogue scene that Van Buren has is with Laszlo's wife, played by Felicity Jones, and he talks about himself being a collector, and he has been collecting I forget what he first talks about, probably like art or something, and then he talks about, I've been collecting all of this liquor, or maybe it's wine or something, but he uses his wealth to collect all of these things. And you get the sense of him talking about, like, Laszlo is just another thing for him to collect, of like him being like, me investing in your husband is essentially the equivalent of me owning him. And I think that explains a lot of what the Guy Pearce character does and his actions in the second part of the movie, is that that character transforms, or rather you begin to see that character as less a good Samaritan and rather like, oh, this is a pretty like corrupt, effed up person that just sort of like thinks that just because he's wealthy that he can just sort of own other people, or
control.
That he can sort of like,
he is all about control.
Right, exactly. And even I think it notable that when the Felicity Jones character comes in, your opinion on Laszlo changes somewhat into, when she finds out her husband is embarking on this thing, like, she's supportive of him, but it complicates his ambition, because she does have a little bit of an attitude of like, oh god, he's going to like spiral, like his obsession is almost like unbearable to live with. And that complicated thing of like, I want to be supportive of my partner's dreams and ambitions, but also like, this person's also like a bit of a nightmare to deal with, like when he's so obsessive and into his work, and that complicates your feelings of Laszlo.
Yeah, not only that, but the fact that, Corbet's also commenting on, in addition to capitalism and, the corruption of the American dream, and, he's also talking about, just masculinity in that era as well. And like, if you are, a man in that time, whether you are an immigrant who has recently escaped the traumas of the Holocaust, or if you are, the spoiled, entitled son of an American industrialist, it's like you're just forced to internalize any sort of qualms or issues that you may be having. So a lot of this stuff, Laszlo isn't allowed to express outwardly. So, it brings it even further inward, which helps explain the heroin, which helps explain the frequent kind of lashing out against this woman who's just also escaped her own hells of the Holocaust to come be reunited with her husband. And we're like, she's come all this way and you're treating her like this. And it's because he's got a lot of these conflicted feelings that he can't really express to her in a socially acceptable way at that time. And then when it finally does explode, it comes out in this, rant of like, they don't want us here. As much as they fawn over what I'm creating and seem to make us, welcome at their dinner parties, they also say things like, we tolerate you, or give me back that penny that I just threw at you. Like, I'm not even going to give you, a penny when it's not of something that I am intentionally choosing to do in front of other people to show how generous I am. So it's just like this, whether it's a huge indignity, like we tolerate you, or whether it's just the little sort of micro indignities he gets thrust upon him every day. It's just, it builds and builds and builds internally. And you see Brody, struggling with that with his character. It's like you just see the weight of these things constantly affect where he is in the story.
And it is worth noting, you touched on it a little bit, Josh, but Adrian Brody's character, Felicity Jones's character, as well as their niece, who's part of their family. Everyone in their family are Holocaust survivors, and it makes a indelible impact on each of them in terms of the way they handle the people around them, in terms of their physical well-being. And I think the film has things to say about dealing with both the trauma and the guilt. There's an aspect of guilt that Holocaust survivors feel that others didn't make it and they did, and their obligation to succeed and to never forget, but also never let it happen again. There are all kinds of things tied up in there that I think are part of these, especially Felicity Jones's character, that she brings to the film that I think are hard things for someone who hasn't experienced the trauma of that to deal with. And so, and the movie really wants you to understand that, like, there was a time I was watching the film and I was sort of like, what? Felicity Jones is like a bummer.
Yeah.
But as I really reflected on when it was over, I was like, no, that was essential to us understanding the main character, Adrian Brody. We're using actors' names as opposed to characters' names, which is fine. But it's essential to us understand what's going on with him and his own guilt at having been in America and her not being able to get there. There's just layer after layer of it that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I love that
Definitely.
point, Jason, because the first time I saw it, the Felicity Jones character, I bumped up against it just because I was like, I don't know, is this character just sort of like she's the dutiful wife and, comes back and just like, my husband, I just want to, make love to him and support him and stuff. And then seeing it a second time, I think that character became richer, and maybe in some ways it was also knowing that Brady Corbet wrote this with his wife Mona Faust, I believe. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But that relationship I think illuminated more, and what you just said I think clarifies a lot of their actions. They have a couple very surreal, sort of strange kind of sex scenes in the movie.
Yeah.
That I think that guilt and that trauma and the sense of Brody feeling like, you have clearly suffered more physically than I have, and I don't know how to handle that. I think informs a lot of those sex scenes and a lot of the complicated feelings around her return. And even I think it illuminates the ending a little bit more into, this very strange epilogue that happens where there's this huge flash forward and we're all of a sudden at this architecture convention in Venice, and there's all this poppy 80s songs instead of the soft piano and big brass of the soundtrack. And you get this explanation of what the the building that Laszlo has constructed sort of represents, and
Right, he has,
it being
it is worth noting, and we're talking spoilers, I think it's so significant that the building that is the center of so much of this film, that the Guy Pearce's character thinks is a tribute to his mother, and a thing that has a giant cross in the middle, that is going to be a Christian relic, in fact is secretly a representation of what it's like to be in a concentration camp.
Yeah, and I found something so moving, and maybe I just didn't pick up on it the first time of, I believe it's his niece as an adult who's sort of explaining this at the conference and saying, like, all of these rooms and the building is sort of designed like the sort of, harsh buildings and sort of prisons of the concentration camp. But the fact that all of these rooms are connected, which Laszlo mentions as being so integral to the design of the building early on, is sort of a way of him saying, like, I can be with my wife, and him processing that guilt that I think you just brought up, Jason, of like, I was not there with her. We were separated, and this is my way of like, can I recreate this prison, but in a way that, like, if we were imprisoned again, like, I could be and just go to the other cell or other like room with my wife. And I don't, that's just like so emotional. And I think such an interesting perspective to add on it.
So can I ask the two of you? There are two things I really want to talk about. The first one is, they made this for like $10-11 million. How is that even possible?
Yeah, I thought it was even less than that. I thought it was like $6 million they made it for. But I mean, like, even still,
if you told me it looks, and look, it doesn't have the visual effects, that drive up the cost of a blockbuster, but I would have thought $60-70 million. The fact that
it's a big sweeping. I mean, compare it to something like Oppenheimer from a couple of years ago. I mean, you would think if you were just sort of like a moviegoer off the street that both of those movies would like cost around the same, and instead one is like a small fraction of like what the other one cost.
Yeah, I think, not to be Captain Buzzkill, but I think the short answer is nobody got paid.
Yeah.
Like, which, for people like, Adrian Brody and Guy Pearce and Felicity Jones, that's probably okay. They can afford to work for scale, and people who clearly come from a more privileged way of life, like your Brady Corbets and Mona Fastfelds. But I just keep thinking about like the people building sets, the
production designer is going to get an Oscar, though. I mean, like,
right? Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
and so if you wanted to, and it's not like anybody held a gun to these people's heads and said like, "Come work on my movie for free," but it does show where a lot of these inflated budgets in the industry go to, and maybe is there a conversation to be had about a middle ground where like there's a reasonable wage to be made here, and you don't have to undercut your workers while also bragging about how cheaply you made the movie.
Well, that's also, I feel like, been kind of the big message of Brady Corbet's like campaign, is him like, didn't he like stand up at the Globes, or maybe it was at like a Q&A or something, and he was basically like teary-eyed, like, it shouldn't be this hard for like us to work. And there was an interesting conversation, I can send it to you guys if you're interested in watching it, that in this award season time, there's all those like variety, like actors on actors or directors on directors, and there was one with him and Sean Baker talking that I thought was so interesting, because both those movies are very, very low budget, and him talking and them both talking about the ways that they kind of like cut costs and stuff to get their movies made is so interesting. And Brady Corbet talking about like, they shot this in like Budapest or Hungary, like they shot this in Europe, and like him and Sean Baker talking about like, it's so expensive to shoot here in the United States, and Brady Corbet being like, we would have not been able to afford to make this movie if we like actually shot it in the Philadelphia area where it's set. And them and all the like little aesthetic choices, like being able to incorporate like archival footage, and even just sort of the the technology they used, which I feel like we have to touch on, the VistaVision, this sort of like old stock that hasn't been used since the 50s. Alfred Hitchcock used it on a lot of his classic movies like North by Northwest and Vertigo, but it adds this sort of like epic scale to the movie that like enables you to get sort of like people in sort of like the same frame without it being distorted as sort of these like massive building structures and cranes. And it was just like so interesting, like hearing them both talk and Brady Corbet talking about like, yeah, all these very like deliberate decisions around like what tech we were going to use, as well as like where we were going to shoot it. That was all basically to like save money, and like them hearing him talk about what it was like to make this big sweeping epic that, Josh, I feel like you talked about like how to sell this to people. Like I've been selling this to people as like, do you like The Godfather? This is kind of like that. Not that it's that good, because that's setting too high of a standard, but like if you like that kind of movie, this is in some ways like the people that like heard about Megalopolis and were like, the guy who made The Godfather is doing a movie about an architect? That sounds cool. This is sort of the movie you kind of wanted that to be, not whatever mess Megalopolis was. And him being able to do this on such a micro budget is like so incredible, and for it to have the kind of ambition and sweep it does is just, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it is a really risky film because you run the risk of being accused of like, a bait and switch there, where like we said, the first half of the movie, I would totally agree with you, is sort of like the rise and prominence of the underdog that you would see in a movie like The Godfather, and then in the back half he's like, all right, now I'm gonna get metaphorical, but not really, because I'm gonna literalize exactly what America does to
you have the rape scene in the movie, which we're talking spoilers, so I don't feel like, which I've heard some people kind of bump up against is like, oh, is that too literal? And like I understand that criticism while also being like, I don't know. I'm fine with people being blunt sometimes, of like the very literal of sort of like Guy Pearce in that moment telling Laszlo like, I own you. You are my bitch, basically. Or, the very literal like, what happens to immigrants in America? They get effed. They get like raped by like American capitalism and exploited. And like that's what that scene is about.
I'm with you on that, but it just feels like the same guy who does that then doesn't get to turn around and also go, oh, but he mysteriously disappears and it's supposed to mean something. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you need to pick your medium, right? Like if you're going to be literal. You can't expect an audience to like automatically change tones and symbolisms with you on a dime like that. And so
that's my problem with the back half, like I said.
Yeah, you got to pick a lane, man. And you're not, and if you want to say like, well, that's just me being experimental or whatever, it's like, well, then do that the first 2.5 hours as well. Like, you don't just get to like change what kind of movie you're making 20 minutes before the end.
So
I guess I still defend it as like, I understand the criticism and like don't have. Yeah, I understand it, while also it just sort of like, that's sort of what I find interesting. Like, I almost prefer the back half of the movie to the front half, which I think makes me a weirdo compared. I know, but in sort of like the back half, it becomes the sort of recontextualization of like, you think you're watching this sort of like inspirational, sweeping, like old school American epic, and then the back half is the like, nah, we gotta complicate this and contradict this, and it sort of being the like drop of poison at the end, and is a lot of what I find interesting about it.
To me, what happens in the final third, both the rape and the disappearance of Guy Pearce's character, took me out of the film, and that to me was the unfortunate impact of those two major events. It's that rather than enjoying and being wrapped up in the story and being completely immersed, I suddenly pulled back and was like, wait, why? What? especially the disappearance. I was like, this doesn't necessarily fit with how that character has gone up until now. What changed to cause? And so I'm removed from the story because now I'm trying to analyze it while I'm experiencing it, and I think that is unfortunate. It doesn't destroy the film by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a little thing, is this a truly, great, unbelievable film, number one on my list, or is it not quite in my top 5? If you want to know why not quite, it's because I was pulled out by some of this stuff that happens in the final third. Hey, really quick, guys. Brady Corbet, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I didn't have any connection. The guy hasn't made very much stuff. He made Vox Lux, which was
I did not like Vox Lux, which is why I'm surprised that I love this movie. And I haven't seen his first film, although it's streaming currently on Criterion. Have you guys seen Childhood of a Leader before?
No. This was my first Brady Corbet.
I would love to hear what you think about Vox Lux, Josh, as someone who really does not like Vox Lux.
It is a weird film. I don't. How did this happen? How did this happen? Where did this guy come from? He's probably going to win Best Director.
He was, if you look, he was a child star before, and then as I think it's as simple as he was a child star that then in interviews he said I kind of realized I didn't like acting and I wanted to do more directing, and then so he started, instead of doing the kind of child star roles that he typically would do, he started working with people like Michael Haneke and Lars von Trier, and taking small roles in their movies to learn from them. And I don't know, the sense of watching interviews with him recently that I've gotten is just sort of a guy who realized I don't want to be Frankie Muniz, I want to be Lars von Trier, you know what I mean? And of just sort of and of a guy who has very, very hard art house taste, and in terms of the stuff he wants to work on. I don't know. It's an interesting trajectory. I was sending one of our film critic colleagues, Jay, I sent him a trailer for a movie that came out when him and I were kids that I'm sure you guys remember the Thunderbirds, the little puppet thing. So do you remember in the mid 2000s there was a live action Nickelodeon Thunderbirds movie?
No.
If you don't, I'm going to send you the trailer because you're not going to believe who the star is. Spoiler, it's Brady Corbet.
Come on, really?
It's wild. I sent that to Jay, and Jay was like, holy shit, I can't believe this.
Yeah, the thing that I remembered him most from in his acting days is he was also on a season of 24.
Right.
Oh, see, I never saw 24.
It's one of the later seasons where it sort of was going off the rails, so I was like, oh yeah, I'd blocked that out.
Yeah, the guy's got ambition, and I'm all for it.
Well, look, after this film, and by the way, how do you oh yeah, I made Vox Lux, and 6-7 years later I'm going to make a 3.5 hour sweeping epic that's going to be the huge awards. The career is just insane. After this film, we're going to pay attention to everything he does. That's for sure.
Yeah, just as a preview, Josh, this is not the movie you would imagine him making if you saw Vox Lux.
Yeah, I remember watching the trailer during that screener season, and I was like, I can already tell I've got other stuff to prioritize over this. And then I started hearing from other critics, and I was like, I'll get to that one later, and it's just one that you never get to.
You're not missing much.
I think definitely. Yeah.
Though weirdly, a movie that is sort of split into two very distinctive halves, with one kind of commenting on the other, I guess is the only comparison point to this.
Well, I think kind of like you were saying before, he's, after this, he gets to write his own ticket, especially if he takes home Best Director, I think most people are predicting. And, what I was kind of thinking to myself is now the question is is he going to become Francis Ford Coppola, or is he going to become Francis Ford Coppola? Which way is he going to go? Is this going to allow him to say, okay, I can still be artistic within the confines of traditional but still kind of out there storytelling, or am I going to go make nothing but Megalopolis from now on? Because I feel like right now it could go either way.
What's his version of Jack, do you guys think?
Thunderbirds, man. It's
Thunderbirds. Well, we're almost approaching an hour. Do you guys have any final Brutalist talking points you want to bring up? Because this is a movie that we could honestly probably talk about for like the same running time as the movie, like almost 4 hours.
I would just tell everybody, like, is this like your stereotypical cliched movie for film critics? Yes. But also, you know, if you're one of the people that complains that they, you know, what I hear all the time is like, they don't make them like they used to, or they don't make movies for grown-ups anymore. My response to that is always like, yeah, they do. You just have to seek them out. And, you know, if you're one of these people who are tired of sequels and reboots and comic book movies and all of the stuff that we hear people complain about, like, it's on you to go see these films and let financiers and distributors know there's an audience for, you know. And look, am I excited for Captain America with Harrison Ford as the Red Hulk? Sure.
Are
you know,
you
I'm
though?
gonna check it
I
out.
am.
But,
I am.
But I also really enjoy movies that challenge me. And are they, you know, I think between the three of us, our criticism is that, like, this is only excellent instead of being a masterpiece. Oh, no. You know,
Jesse thinks it's a masterpiece. It's okay.
I'm not going to throw that out there yet. We won't know that for like another like 10 years or so. But I have enjoyed thinking. This is the movie I've thought about more than any other movie I've seen in the last 12 months.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I was saying was like, you know, if that's our biggest complaint is like, oh no, a movie challenged me and it didn't quite hit the mark like it wanted to. There are worse things to complain about in the movie industry right now.
So my big thing I would say is this may be the film to me that feels the most real and honest about the American dream and the immigrant story, because you know, like I was saying earlier, we want it to be a straight line. And this movie is most assuredly that. Look, when at the very beginning he comes in, he's got a cousin or something like that who gives him a job, and you're like, oh, he's on his way up. Then he goes down, and then you're
right.
and like not like momentary setback. Like, remember it's like 3 or 4 years later, and he's working as a draftsman.
Right, he's a heroin addict shoveling coal in like the like poorest neighborhood of Philadelphia.
Well, no,
basically.
but I'm talking even beyond that. The after they get fired from the library job and they don't get paid, and he is I think is he in New York or Philadelphia? He's working as a draftsman at an architecture firm. He's like,
oh, that's right,
genius, unbelievable craftsman is like just sketching little stuff, and you know, for not very much money. It's not, life is not a straight line. And this movie, I think, is so honest with its characters. It's so real about the path, and the path is never a straight line. And that's one of the things I really, really love about the first 2/3 or so of the film. And it's just worth watching to see a movie that I think defies expectations by being more realistic.
Yeah, I love that point, Jason, because that's been an aspect of the movie that I think I have found so moving, and maybe, you know, it's,
I mean, how many times
to the listeners?
How many times in this movie are you like, he's made it now? All right, we're there. He's made it now, and then they're like, nope, sorry, it's not that easy.
And maybe it's being too revealing to things I'm thinking about in my own life, and you know, stuff like that. But you know, the idea of taking as like life is a series of up and downs and like weird digressions, and like there's suffering here and success there, and it goes from one to the other, and that is a like very real thing that this movie sort of embraces, that I find.
And Hollywood never does that. And that's one of the things I love about this film.
Yeah. Not enough save the cat moments. We needed more save the cat.
But
moments.
there is a cat. There is a cat.
There is a cat.
There is a cat in one moment. Well, guys, I could talk about The Brutalist for like 8 more hours with you guys, but I don't think our listeners have that kind of attention span. But if you're the kind of person out there that's like, it's a 3.5 hour movie, I don't want to watch it. Don't be a pussy. Go watch it. I know that you're out there watching 12 hours of Stranger Things on a Saturday, and you're watching those like 4-hour football games. You can sit through a 3.5 hour movie. I'm looking at you, listener. But yeah, this has been fun. Guys, as you mentioned, we have a Captain America movie coming out. We'll probably discuss that. Maybe we'll do some more review rewinds. I don't know. Is anything else coming up on the calendar? We got the Bong Joon-ho movie, but that's still like a month away.
Yeah, I think Captain America is the next really big thing. Although everyone is raving about this film Companion, which I didn't get a chance to see.
I didn't either.
Same.
Because I heard I don't know if it's the twist about it. I heard some bit of detail that I'm not going to spoil on here because I don't know if it's a twist or not about the movie that I was immediately just sort of like, don't care. But apparently it's good. So I don't know.
It is. It's like 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. Everyone is raving.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got that, and then next weekend you've got Heart Eyes, which is sort of like a Valentine's horror. So it feels like we're in another one of these upswings of like genre horror.
We have the monkey.
And the monkey.
Perkins.
Yeah.
Long legs.
Side note, did you see? I thought it was pretty funny just to like have a little marketing moment as we close out. Did you guys see the email we got from Neon where they were basically like,
yes,
that was just screenshots of a trailer that they sent in, I guess, to like run in front of the Super Bowl or something like that, and just all the emails from like the networks that were basically like, Are you joking? We can't air this trailer. Like this is, and I was just like, that's a chef's kiss, just like brilliant marketing technique of like, we intentionally sent like an insanely inappropriate, like gory trailer for this movie to then screenshot the like appalled reactions from network executives to then use as marketing for like, do you want to see a seriously effed up horror movie? Look what the people thought when we sent them the trailer for.
Well, look, I think Neon is really, really. I mean, those guys, they're getting all their bang for their buck in terms of their marketing. And a year ago,
they're giving A24 a run for their money. As like, we're the like real geniuses of like marketing, like art house independent stuff.
We're not your mom and dad's movie studio.
Yes.
A year ago, they did it on Osgood Perkins' last film, Longlegs, by not showing us, what's his name? Star.
Nicolas Cage.
They wouldn't show us Nicolas Cage's face. They were like, "Oh, this is so shocking. Nicolas Cage is in this film, but we're not going to show him to you." And everyone was like, "Ooh, I got to see it." And now with the monkey, they're trying to do this and they're not going to succeed because that was unbelievable. The buzz that created. But they're trying to create the same kind of buzz for the monkey. Although I think it's not. I think it's going to be more funny almost than scary.
I watched whatever the recent like Red Band trailer was for, and I was like, oh, this looks like a comedy. Like this looks more like Sam Raimi kind of like, kid
like a
with
really
a magnifying glass
comedy.
like burning ants on the side of the road sort of
So
thing.
look, Jesse, we got plenty of stuff to talk about.